with the baby gear she'd need on the long trip. She lifted the interior flap and pulled out a manila envelope. She felt the flash drive she'd slid into it, along with a handful of photocopies. Maybe they'd save her, maybe not. She unlocked the ornately carved box on the top of her bureau, removed the jewelry from their protective boxes, and dropped them in a paper bag. Who would store thousands of dollars worth of gemstones in a sack from the market? It looked like a pile of trinkets one might buy at a kiosk at the mall. Finally, Ray dug a box from deep in the closet. She'd owned these items for years, worn them in Africa to fit in where Western women often wouldn't. She hated them. She'd seen what the clothes meant for women all over the world. They would be the perfect disguise. Julien's guards would never suspect it was she who hid beneath. She pulled the loose-fitting black abaya over her jeans and t-shirt, then fastened on her baby carrier. She added the wide black scarf around her shoulders and positioned it over the baby's sling. Yes, that should work, as long as Jean-Louis kept quiet. She pulled the note she'd written from her bedside drawer and reread it, just to be sure. The hospital called. Graham's taken a turn for the worse, and she's not expected to pull through. Forgive me, but I have to see her. I'll call when we change planes this afternoon. Love, Ray. Love, Ray. Those last two words had been the hardest to write, not because they weren't true, but because on some level they still were. She left the note on Julien's bedside table. No going back now. She grabbed the second note and walked to his office. He kept the door locked, but the old-fashioned locks were easy enough to pick. She'd done it enough. It took less than a minute to get the door open. She opened the file cabinet and slipped the note into a file containing information on his other business, the one he'd kept from her. When Julien realized Ray wasn't where she said she'd be, he'd check his files. Then he would know. Either he would leave her alone because she could expose him, or he would hunt her down. She hoped he would choose the first. She glanced at the photograph of Julien and Jean-Louis on the desk, the one she'd snapped a week earlier. The love that shone in her husband's gaze was unmistakable. Tears stung her eyes. At least she knew that wasn't a lie. Maybe Julien loved his son enough to let him go. She wouldn't count on it. In the bedroom, she fastened the niqab around her head so only her eyes showed. After she dragged her suitcase to the front door, she returned to the baby's room, where she changed his clothes. His eyes blinked open, and she kissed his cheek. "Shh, baby. Go back to sleep." He scrunched up his face as if he were about to cry. At least his cry wasn't that loud yet. At 2 weeks old, his little lungs could only make so much noise. She lifted him and rocked him until he relaxed against her shoulder. As she eased him into the sling, he barely stirred. She draped the scarf over him, placed the messenger bag on top of the suitcase, and slipped out. She lugged her suitcase down the stairs, through the center courtyard, and out a side door, where the tiny cab she'd ordered the night before waited for her in the alley. The taxi driver hefted her suitcase into the trunk, while she glanced left and right, straining to see in the dim light of dawn. Julien's guards were nowhere in sight. The morning was quiet, free of weapons and violence. Charles de Gaulle, s'il vous plaît. The drive to the airport seemed to take forever. Ray didn't relax until her flight's wheels lifted off the runway. She kissed Jean-Louis' tender head, wiped the tears that had dropped onto his thin spray of hair, and whispered, "We're safe, for now." Nearly 9 hours later, Rachel pulled her suitcase.